Co-founder and director of Anonymous for the Voiceless. Asal is also the co-founder and director. She couldn't be here. There was a passport issue because she has an Iranian passport, and getting into Canada and going back to the United States is a real issue. So she couldn't make it to this workshop in Cube, unfortunately. But what we're going to do through this workshop is I'm going to take you through the Cube of Truth, and the aim of the workshop itself is to inspire you to master your craft of communication with non-vegans, and doing that specifically in the format of street outreach and how we do that on the streets of the Cube of Truth. So, being proficient in the Cube of Truth. Is this microphone okay? Yeah. Alright, cool. So, being proficient in the Cube of Truth, and I like to focus heavily on outreach. That's kind of my shtick. But I'll talk you through AV and just introduce you to AV just to begin with. For those who don't know about AV, raise your hand if you've never been to a Cube of Truth. Wow, so many newbies. More than I've ever seen before at a workshop. Round of applause for those people. I just want to say thank you so much for deciding to take action for animals. It's truly the best thing I've ever done with my life, and the Cube of Truth has offered me a format that enables me to process all of that frustration that we have as vegans in this non-vegan world and put it into something that's actually fulfilling and something that's effective. So that's the reason why Asal and I created this organization. So back in April of 2016, that was the inception of AV. We started on the streets in Melbourne City in Australia. We started just doing masked video outreach inspired by Earthing's experience. You may have seen that kind of campaign before. It's a different mask, and there's no structure necessarily to the campaigns. You just get out there with your masks, your signs, and your laptops, and you play Earthings, the documentary, and that's pretty much all there is to it. When we started, that was the inspiration, but when we got out on the streets, we realized there was probably more that we could do to make it a bit more effective. We added the outreach element and really focused on what that element would look like. And then we worked on perfecting the video outreach element, the laptops and the masks and everything, into an actual art piece or an art installment on the streets that makes people actually stop out of their own interest, out of their own accord, not because we're roping them into something with gimmicks or we're piquing people's curiosity genuinely here with something that genuinely looks cool. So that's where it all started in Melbourne City. Over the course of 17 events, we constructed what we know today as the Cube of Truth. And we didn't call it the Cube of Truth in the beginning. In fact, we did at least 20 events before we changed the name of the event to Cube of Truth. It was initially called Thousand Eyes Experience, inspired by Earthing's experience, but we played Thousand Eyes, which was a 4-minute clip put together by Aussie Farms in Australia, and it's a 4-minute. I guess you could say it's bits and pieces from Lucent, the documentary, if you've seen that, and it's just put together in a 4-minute clip. And because we're in Australia, we thought it would make sense to use that clip because it's local, and we'll diffuse the whole excuse of this doesn't really happen here. So Thousand Eyes Experience is what we called it. Then we added the virtual reality headset. We called it the Thousand Eyes and Virtual Reality Experience, and that was the extent of the campaign name at the time. But now we've changed it to Cube of Truth, even though we called it Cube of Truth from like the third demonstration. Pardon me, I must apologize, I'm not feeling the best. I've been sick the last 2-3 days, bedridden, and but don't feel sorry for me, I'm thrilled to be here. There's a lot of people here, and we're all excited about everybody showing up for the animals. But that's probably why I sound like trash right now. So, so we called it the Cube of Truth. The way that it came about, people seem to be curious how it all came about, like how the the cube and everything came about. So Asar came up with the idea of forming in a cube during us experimenting with different ideas. She said, let's form in a square. We did that, and immediately we knew that was the best formation. We hadn't seen it being done anywhere around the world, whether it's in the vegan movement or otherwise, and we just thought that has to happen, and this has to happen everywhere. So we stuck with it in Melbourne, but we wanted to build the event and I guess perfect it in Melbourne City before we made it a blueprint for others to follow around the world. So that's what we focused on for 17 events, and then we moved to Thailand, Asal and I, while the Melbourne chapter carried on with organisers that were just taking over. And then we went on a mission to make this global around the world, and that was in September of 2016 that we made that move to Thailand. By the end of 2016, we had roughly 20 chapters around the world. We, within a 6-month period, and this figure is going to be significant, you'll realize why in a moment, but we hit 1,000 conversions in 6 months, so 1,000 people taking veganism seriously. And to celebrate that little milestone, Asal and I got AV, the symbol, tattooed on our necks. And it's kind of funny thinking about that now, because of the exponential growth that we're seeing now. But so that happened in that time period, and then in 2017 we saw unseen growth, we saw exponential growth, and became the fastest growing animal rights organization on the planet. We have now also become the most global animal rights organization on the planet, with more groups around the world than any other animal rights organization, with 725 cities doing the Cube of Truth now. So exponential growth is what we've experienced, and so much so that as an organization, we actually run the risk of collapsing from all the pressure, because we've grown perhaps a bit too quick for our own good, and we're in the process of building infrastructure and building teams at the moment to ensure that we don't just survive that growth challenge, but we rise to the challenge and we continue to foster exponential growth. So that's what we're working on as an organization at the moment, but you guys are here for the Cube of Truth. So we're going to talk about street outreach, and I'm going to give you guys some stuff that I've learned along the way that's really helped me. So I'm going to teach you some cool stuff about communication, but I'll start with the Cube of Truth itself, the street outreach campaign. So the campaign is broken up into 2 parts. There's the Cube, and then there's the outreach. Now, by the way, if you guys have any questions, we're going to do a Q&A at the end. And so save your questions, and we'll do a general Q&A, and then we'll do an outreach Q&A, which is a lot of fun, where you guys can throw your most challenging outreach, let's say non-vegan argumentation. You can just throw them at me, and I'll help you to respond to them one by one. But anything you're challenged with whatsoever. So we'll do that at the end. So the Cube and then the outreach. The Cube is pretty straightforward. So you don't need to show up to a Cube of Truth event with masks or anything other than your laptops with the footage on it, which you can find in the description of the event page. You can find the links to download the footage and to also download VLC player, which we recommend to play the videos through on your device. So when you show up to a Cube of Truth, if you're at a Cube of Truth event, you are expected to be in the Cube, because the Cube is very important to the event. Without the Cube, we can't do the outreach. If I had to pick one element over the other, I would pick the Cube. The outreach is the educational element, which helps us to educate the public, and it's vital that we have the outreach element. But the Cube is vital to the campaign in the sense that without the Cube, people aren't stopping. So everybody is expected to be in the Cube unless you have a medical condition and you can't withstand standing in a Cube. But we are all expected to do the Cube. So with the outreach element, you're not expected necessarily to do it, especially if it's your first time in a Cube. We understand that you may not know your stuff, you may not feel confident in having these conversations. So you're encouraged to do what we call shadowing, which is where you stand around people having these interactions and you learn from the discussions, but without distracting the interaction. So you can do that for a few Cubes before you actually do outreach. So I just wanted to get that out there, that the Cube is something that everybody's expected to do, but not necessarily with the outreach. And no role is above one or the other, but many people do seem to consider the outreach to be above the Cube for some reason. I'll jump in the cube if needed. Nobody's above it at all. If it's needed at any point in time during the event, then we need to jump in the cube as long as there's an organizer, as long as the organizer is able to run the event during that time. So the cube. When you're standing in the cube, we focus heavily on aesthetics because we believe that the more serious that we seem to be taking this, the more serious people take us, and that opens up a completely different world of conversation with these people on the street. So we want people to take us seriously. And as we know, vegans are not taken seriously currently, and the internet tells people to hate vegans. So what we need to do is change that by taking the work that we do on the streets seriously, and that's what we've achieved with the Cube of Truth. People respond really well to these campaigns. So, standing in the cube would mean that you're standing nice and straight, nice and straight posture. If you're holding a sign or sorry, I'm trying to work out the distance between the mic here. But if you're holding a sign or a screen, you want to hold it nice and straight, and those on outreach or organising the event might come over from time to time and straighten things for you, because we can see from the outside perspective, you know, exactly how things need to look. We're trying to make things as visually pleasing as possible and have everything looking as organised as possible, because that's what will cause people to stop. Now in the cube, we want to stand shoulder to shoulder-ish, as close to as possible without the signs overlapping or the screens overlapping. We want to make sure that we're standing nice and flush, but we as organisers will help with that, asking you to move back a bit or to move forward a bit, etc. Now, there's no need for cubers to communicate whatsoever with the bystanders on the street or with outreachers. Now, the only time you'll need to communicate with an outreacher is where you would raise your hand. So if you do need to talk to us at all, raise your hand. And there's 3 circumstances where you raise your hand. I'll go through them with you. But I just want to say that if you're in the cube, try to just keep your vision forward. So you're looking forward. You're not moving your head around. Your hands aren't in your pockets. You're not looking to your left or right and speaking to the person next to you. So just please be present and in the moment, standing in solidarity for the animals. It makes a world of difference, let me tell you, from the outside and how it affects the overall aesthetic of the cube. So you would raise your hand in 3 circumstances if you need to communicate with the outreachers. Now, we do this because if a bystander comes over and starts talking to you in the cube and says, "Why are you guys here? Why are you wearing a mask? Or what's this, you know, where do you guys get your protein?" We want you to just not reply to those people, because it's the outreach's job to do that. So don't respond. If they continue, then maybe just raise your hand, and then an outreacher, because an outreacher should notice this by now, but if they don't, then just raise your hand and an outreacher will come over and speak to them, because that's what the outreacher's job is. And if you start talking to the bystander, it will break the aesthetic completely of the cube. So you'll also encourage more of that, and other bystanders will start talking to cubers. So please stick to the format within the Cube of Truth. Please hold your question until later. Just remember what that question is though. So raise your hand in 3 circumstances. The first circumstance would be if you see a child watching unattended by a parent. So we want to make sure that we have longevity here with these campaigns, and we want to stay on the right side of the law here as well. So let's just raise your hand if you see a child watching unattended by a parent, and then we will go over to the child and we'll find out if there is a parent and get their permission. If there is no parent, then we take the child away from the screens, but we continue to educate them in a child-friendly manner. So we have a child-friendly conversation about veganism with them. The second circumstance you'd raise your hand is if you see somebody who has been watching for a significant amount of time, I would say over a minute, maybe over a minute and a half, and they haven't been spoken to by an outreacher, so the outreachers aren't doing our jobs, we're not doing our jobs. So please alert us to the people on the streets who you think might be prime. They might be having a visceral response to the footage, and we don't want to leave those opportunities untapped. So we should be doing our job and seeking out these opportunities as outreachers, but if we just so happen to not see these people, then just raise your hand and let us know. Now, there's a lot of tact that needs to come with that. Please don't raise your hand and then just point at the bystander, because they'll know that you're talking about them, and then they'll put up a wall and feel intimidated, and they won't be as open in the conversation. what would be better is if you just explain the color of their clothing or something like that. And then the outreacher also needs to have tact and not just immediately walk directly over to the bystander, because that will also alert the bystander to the conversation being about them. So as an outreacher, maybe walk around the queue before you go over and talk to them, or maybe just look around before you go over and talk to them. Just be tactful. In the third circumstance, you'd raise your hand is if you need to come out of the cube, and I would recommend that you come out of the cube if you feel that you need to come out of the cube. So don't drive yourself into the ground. I've seen people faint and smash their heads on the concrete. It's not a good thing to witness. It shakes everybody up, and please don't do it. I know that it can come down to like this feeling of inadequacy, like I don't want to let my colleagues down or the animals down ultimately, but you are letting the animals down ultimately if you end up fainting, because you can literally cause brain damage, So what we want to do is make sure that you come out of the cube if you need to come out of the cube. This is about teamwork anyway, so you shouldn't feel bad about that. There are people that are willing to jump in the cube and replace you while you're out of the cube, and we all work together in this collective machine while we're doing this campaign. So they're the three circumstances you raise your hand, and that's the cube of truth. Nicole's already explained that we wear dark clothing at these events. The darkest clothing that you have possible. Please try not to wear vegan-related clothing. I know that may seem a bit too strict, but it really does help with trying to keep people's curiosity at a high. Because when they see the word vegan, immediately prejudices start to fire away in their minds. And again, like I just said, the internet has told society to hate veganism, and it's done a good job pretty much at this point. So when people do approach us and they see animal rights and vegan-related stuff written on our clothing, it will help to drive people away more than it will to drive people towards us. So, I'm not saying that we should veer away from saying the word vegan, and I'll get into that. I'm just saying with regards to the first impression that we give people. So, dark clothing is best. The Anonymous for the Voiceless shirt doesn't give it away necessarily. So that does also work at these events. It does also look a lot more professional if you're wearing an AV shirt, but it's not required. So that's the cube of truth. I guess what I'll do now is I'll open up Q&A for general questions and for the cube if you have any questions regarding the cube. But I'll only do the Q&A for about 20 minutes, and then I'll get back to doing the workshop. So I'll get back to speaking about, but this time I'll speak about outreach and talk to you about the most effective ways we've found to carry out your outreach and to carry out just communicating with non-vegans about this message. So I'll open that up, and then I'll open up a Q&A relating to that after that. So how about we do that? So with the Q&A, can I just lay out a bit of a format that we can all agree to sticking to, please? So the first thing is, can I just ask you all to agree to asking a question and not making a statement or a comment? And can I also ask you to not pose a question that relates to the previous question? Because I want to keep things flowing here. So once we do cover a question, it's covered, we move on to the next completely different topic, and we keep bringing up new topics. And that allows us to cover many, many different topics throughout tonight. So if we can all agree to that, that would be cool. So I'll take general questions now. If you've got outreach questions like what would you say to plants have feelings, then just keep that to the end. Anybody? General questions? Yes.
What about shorts, t-shirts, does that have to be long sleeve or clothing wise, or no?
Whatever the weather is demanding of us human beings. So if we need shorts, we need shorts, but just try to keep the color of the clothing dark as possible. Yes?
Have you ever run into a situation where the physical space works better with different shapes?
You have got a very profound voice. Shout out to you for that. I would say that no. It only in very select circumstances works out better to say form a line or something like that. But generally speaking, a small 4-man cube would be better than a line in a specific area, like a pathway, for example. And we've tested it all. When we started, we did everything. We did oblongs, we did diamonds, we did diagonal lines. We did squares with one side chopped off and pushed up against a wall. We did. We've done many different things. Circles as well. Circles are actually incredibly hard to keep together. Like they seem like they would be easier to keep together, but they're incredibly hard. They end up losing the shape of the circle too easily. So does that answer your question?
Well, I guess when you talk about the wall, for example, does that mean you just move to a different space? Because sometimes there's a wall, and then you have people facing a wall, showing the wall footage.
Yes, but it's not about that necessarily. It's about the art installment itself, and it provides a workstation for outreaches. So people will stop in that part of between the cube and the wall. People will actually stop because it's not blocking off traffic, and some people actually enjoy that zone where they can stand and have no foot traffic brushing by them, and they can have a conversation about what they're seeing. So it's about creating a workstation and what's more captivating aesthetically overall. And I wouldn't push a cube up to a wall too close anyway. I'd give a good amount of distance between the wall and the cube. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it sounds like you adjust the positioning.
Yeah, we would.
Rather than the shape to the environment.
Yeah, we would. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so what happens if, I know this is a situation we shouldn't get into, but what if you're in a cube and there's somebody watching or somebody talking to you and there aren't any outreach people available?
So that's a very good question. Does everybody hear the questions okay? Because if not, I can repeat them.
Actually, if you could repeat it for the camera, maybe.
For the camera?
Yeah. If you don't mind, if you don't want to, that's fine.
I'd rather not, because I'd rather just
Sure.
keep it real for everybody in here. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought for your question. What was the question?
And there aren't enough outreach people.
Right, and that is a very good question. So, if you're standing around in a cube of truth and there's nobody to outreach, then the ideal thing to do is to look like you're still on the job. Please don't turn this into a social event, because it will completely destroy the aesthetics of the event, and people walking by it will just think that this is some kind of casual get-together. And we have plenty of those things as vegans. So, in fact, after the cube we have that. We can do the socializing and we can have the food. You know, and I actually really enjoy that. But during the Cube of Truth, please, let's just be at an animal rights event and focus on the animals. I would say stand closer to the cube as opposed to further away from the cube, because people like to follow. And if they see people standing closer to the cube, they'll also stand closer to the cube. If people are standing further away from the cube, they'll feel uncomfortable standing closer to the cube, because they'll be among the only ones doing it. Does that answer your question?
Well, no, so if you're in the cube and somebody comes to talk to you and there's no one to talk to them, just stand there and...
In the queue, my bad. I thought you meant on outreach.
No, if you're in the queue.
My bad. Okay, so if you're in the queue and there's literally nobody on outreach,
or no one available.
no one available, we would still not talk to them. We would keep our hands raised. If you happen to have a card in your pocket, one of those cards. I also don't have one on me. If Nicole or Reese, if you have one, that would be amazing to be able to show everybody. If you had enough to pass out, that would also be incredible. But if not, that's cool. Maybe give them a card. Yeah, give them a card and say nothing. Say nothing whatsoever. Because the moment you speak, this is the moment you break the aesthetic, and people will start to continue to talk to you. Thank you very much. So these are our cards. For those of you who've never been to a cube, you may or may not have ever seen these before. These are our closing cards. I'll get into these a little bit later. But this is what you would offer them if there's nobody for them to speak to. And if they genuinely want to have a conversation with us, they'll stick around for somebody to talk to them, or they'll follow up on the information on this card. It's just too much of a risk for us to open up dialogue with bystanders at that point, because if we break that aesthetic, we open up the event for far too many missed opportunities for that one opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're on.
What about offering food? like samples, like dairy-free milk and stuff like that, as a way to, like, people are always asking questions, like, what do I eat?
Yeah.
And it'd be helpful if we had it on hand, like right there.
Okay, so that's a really good question as well. We have gone back and forth with this idea for quite some time. We obviously know that people love free food, and our game is trying to convince people to go vegan. So we want to get people's attention and have that conversation with them. But our executive decision on this was that essentially when we have conversations with people, we focus a lot on like the animals that people consume in their diets. And the animals that we're showing on the screens are mainly food animals like cows, chickens, pigs, turkeys, fish. And yet we feel that if we introduce the actual physical food element into the event, that we're positioning we're overly positioning veganism as dietary, and we don't want to do that. As you know, diet is just part of being vegan, and being vegan is a moral standpoint that you take when you see all forms of animal exploitation as wrong. And so it's also our job as educators on the streets to make sure people understand this on the streets. But if we add the food element, I feel like we're confusing people and making this far too much about diet. Yeah, so that's why I decided to not go with the food element. There's two other reasons as well. One other reason is that you have to also pay for things like permit costs, and there's food licensing fees and insurance and stuff like that goes along with having food at your events, and that can become very costly for our chapters. We don't really want to go down that route. Let's say somebody eats something, they get sick, and we have a lawsuit on our hand just based on that. And there could be people out there trying to troll us just with that. They could do that. I don't know, there's many factors here to consider. The other reason had to do with, let me think. Also, like, we feel like if we're effectively educating people, if I'm talking to you as you're not vegan, and I'm talking to you and I'm effectively educating you on what veganism is, our aim is to have you connect to that sense of injustice, because that's what this is predicated on. And we feel that if you're effectively connecting to that sense of injustice, the last thing you should want to do is eat food at that point in time. So we feel that if we're doing our job correctly, food should not even be in the picture. So that's the other reason. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. Yes.
So when there are a lot of overeaters, sometimes they're idle because there aren't enough people to talk to. What's the aesthetic in that situation? What do you think they should be doing?
Yeah, so I was just covering that before because I thought that his question was your question. But essentially, when people are not available to speak to, we don't have the availability. So we've got more outreachers than bystanders. As outreachers, just stand closer to the cube as opposed to further away from the cube, and just still, look like you're on the job, as opposed to standing around talking to each other, looking at your phone, hands in pockets, looking bored.
Just down if they're acting as if they're engaged with the video, if that's helpful.
You could just stand and watch the video, but if you don't want to watch the video, you could just, I literally just stand and look around like this. Just keeping a watch over the event, that kind of thing. Does that help? Does that help to answer your question? Okay, cool. Anybody else? Yes.
I have done cubes in different cities, and there were some organizers that said, well, let people watch a little bit longer than a minute. But the thing is, to let people watch longer, then maybe someone is not going to get them once they finally leave, or then they miss them when they get there, they're starting to walk off. So do you think 1 minute is always a good time reference? Because I would have thought so too, but
We don't have an official time period on how long we wait before moving in and talking to somebody. I like to say 30 seconds, but I don't have an official time period that we place on this because everybody's a little bit different in how they respond to the footage they're watching. And also, I think it's just a fine art of knowing when to move in. So you basically don't want to wait too long because they could walk off, but you also don't want to move in too quickly because you'll reek of desperation and push people away. And while this is the most urgent issue on the planet, reeking of desperation doesn't work in our favor. So I would say don't even go by timing, just use your best sense of judgment. If you move in too quickly, I guarantee you will push people away. If you move in too late, you'll be too late and people will walk off and you'll miss the opportunity. So this is all about working out when to move in. It's mastering that art. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Yes.
What would you say to what would you say to vegans who are vegans for ethical?
Essentially, the whole goal of the world tour is to go to every city around the world, as many cities as makes sense to do so. We're obviously set up in 725 cities, so it's not possible to travel to every city. We can only do one city a week, maybe two at best. There's only 52 weeks in a year, you get the point. So the goal is to optimize chapters and to breathe a breath of fresh air into each chapter and just ensure the health of each chapter. So we just want the communities to grow and thrive in each city, and the global community itself will grow and thrive as a result of that. And that's what we're seeing. We're breaking records in every city. We just came from Toronto. We had 100 people show up, which is an attendance record, and we broke the conversion record with 287 people taking veganism seriously. And we had Vegan Gains come out and do street outreach for the first time. You know, we had Ask Yourself come out and do street outreach for the first time. These people who are usually doing activism on the internet. So that was an epic event. The World Tour has been nothing short of epic, so I'm really proud to be doing this, and it's been a thrill to join everybody, you know, in each city and collaborate. So that's been the whole concept behind the World Tour. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much for making Vancouver part of the tour.
Thank you for having me. We were supposed to be here a little while ago, believe me, but we got held up in Australia. So I'm going to close off the general Q&A now and move on to outreach, and then I'll open up the outreach Q&A after that. So raise your hand if you don't necessarily know what outreach means. Okay, cool. So everybody has a good understanding of what I mean by outreach. Now, I have a sales background. It's what I did for a paycheck. I didn't do it out of any passion whatsoever. I just did it because I dropped out. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out in year 12 actually to kind of make a statement. I was always a bit of an activist. And then I went straight into the workforce, and I just wanted to focus on making money. So that was my whole shtick back then. I was also focused on making music. So my whole goal was to be a musician. But along that path, you have to make money, obviously, so I worked in sales. I was good at putting words together, so I worked in sales, it made sense. But along the way, I got a lot of sales training, and I got trained by some really amazing sales representatives, people who run out. I mean, I've been a part of training sessions that would otherwise cost $5,000, $10,000 to be a part of, and I'd be part of them simply for being a part of a company or an organization that's paid for this. Now, raise your hand if you've ever worked in a call center or you've worked in sales and you've had some form of sales training. See how many people raise their hand? Isn't it amazing to discover that you can use the skills that you learned in those training sessions to liberate animals? Because that's exactly what I discovered, and I'm going to share some of that with you. When we started AV, I realized that outreach and sales go hand in hand, and I had never seen anybody talk about outreach as sales before. Like, when you hear somebody say plants have feelings, that's an objection. An objection, handling that objection would be, our response, as you would know, is that plants don't have a brain or a central nervous system or a heart, they're not sentient. You get the point. That would be that way that we handle the objection. But that methodology comes from the sales world. Discovery questions, open-ended questions. You have your intro. You have your close at the end. So there are many different factors here, but I'm going to teach you some sales strategies that have helped with outreach. And I'm also just going to teach you a bit about how we do this specifically at the Cube of Truth. Okay, so like we've just covered, we don't approach anybody and everybody, and we don't just hand out flyers and cards to anybody. That's not what we're here for. We're waiting for people to stop. We allow them to watch. We give them a significant amount of time to watch, and then we approach them. People ask me all the time, what's the best opening line? Hello. It's the best opening line ever. Just start as a normal human being. Be cool with people, because that works best. And then the first question you could ask as a discovery question would be, have you ever seen this kind of footage before? You'll typically hear that question at a Cube of Truth no matter where you are. Okay, so have you ever seen this kind of footage before will allow you to ascertain where that person stands in regards to this issue. So if they've never seen this footage before and it shocks and disgusts them, you've got a pretty good standing in the conversation. But if somebody has seen the footage many times and has grown a sense of apathy, you've got more work on your hands. So discovery questions are important in the beginning to ascertain who you're talking to. And it will also allow any objections to arise through your discovery questions, because if you're asking the right kinds of questions, then their objections will naturally come out. I also like to ask the question, did you know that this is certified organic, free-range, grass-fed, certified humane, whatever applies here locally to Vancouver, this is all that stuff. So I like to address that first and foremost in the conversation, or early on in the conversation, because people tend to think that we're there trying to protest treatment of animals, and that's very important that you address that early on, because if people think that we're just trying to provide larger cages for animals, we're not doing our jobs. Is everybody, I didn't really cover this, but we are an abolitionist vegan organization, and that means that we do not promote anything less than a vegan message. So on outreach, I mean, you're obviously welcome to promote veganism however you prefer at other events, but at Cubes we just ask you to promote a clear vegan message, which means no vegetarianism, no meatless Mondays, no journeys, no baby steps. Veganism is extremely easy, and we all know that as vegans, and believe me, I'm very compassionate in the way that I see this. But if we start promoting the idea that it's harder than what it actually is to people by encouraging that people take baby steps, we believe we're doing an injustice to the animals, because we, as educators, we need to promote the reasons why people need to go vegan and then show people how easy it is. But if people aren't sold on how easy it is, it's because they're not sold on why they need to go vegan. The conviction is the answer to pushing people in the direction of doing something. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that. But for now, I just wanted to let you all know that we promote a clear vegan message. If people want to do less than veganism after we've promoted a clear vegan message to them, believe me, they will. They'll do less on their own accord. But it shouldn't be because we've encouraged them to do less. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we just show people why and how. Now, I just want to let you know that there's 4 different things I'm going to package here for you that you can take home, because I realize I could talk all night about stuff, and I've been at workshops before, and it's hard to actually absorb and take home stuff. So I'm going to try and give you 4 things to take home and remember for the Cube of Truth tomorrow, and even carry it over to any other outreach you engage in. The first thing is, why is far more important than how. I've already sort of covered that, but while I'm on the point. Why is so much more important than how? Because if you convince somebody on why they need to do something, they'll even figure out how. They'll go on Google and they'll start researching exactly what they need to do to make it happen. And with the little bit of help that you give them, that'll be enough for them if they're really sold on why. So yes, it's important that we should show people how to go vegan, tell them about Happy Cow, vegan recipes, give them the support they need. But it's nowhere near as important as why someone should go vegan or why someone should do anything. So please focus your advocacy on why far more than how. We talk a lot about how, as a movement I see a lot of it, but we don't focus on why enough, I feel. Second thing I want to share with you is we operate through a 100-point system. This is something that was rolled out by an Israeli activist by the name of Omri Paz. A 100-point system will ensure that you won't lose your mind. So when you're talking to people in outreach, just understand your goal isn't necessarily to convince them to go vegan on the spot. If they go vegan on the spot, we're not going to be mad at that. That's also our goal. But just try to focus on planting seeds effectively and pushing them up on the 100-point system. So what does that mean? It means if you have an effective conversation with somebody, you push them up 50 points. Then they go home and watch a documentary that's vegan related. That convinces them. That pushes them up 25 points. Then they have a vegan meal with a friend. That pushes them up 5 points. Then they see a post on Facebook by someone they respect and admire talking about veganism. That pushes them up 10 points. You get the point. They hit it 100 points like most of us. There's a process. Even for those of you who say you went vegan overnight, I know that it didn't happen overnight. There was a process that led up to that point that, made it easy for you to turn that switch on, but there was a process before that point. And we just need to focus on adding as many points to people's 100-point system as possible, okay? So that's the second thing I want to share with you all. The third thing I want to share with you all is the sales process itself. So traditionally speaking, sales has 3 parts to it, 3 steps. And it's a process that if you take anybody through, no matter what you sell them on, as long as you meet the demands of each of these stages, then you'll successfully convince them. Okay, so whether you're trying to sell somebody an SUV or you're trying to sell somebody veganism, it's the same process. So there's 3 parts to the process. The first part, I'll say stages. The first stage is to get somebody emotionally convicted. So we all know that veganism is extremely logical, extremely rational, and we have all the facts on our side because we have the truth on our side. And it's very important that you do share those truths and you stick with reason when you're discussing this, but it's also very important that you have somebody emotionally convicted, because if you only stick with reason, logic, facts, then you are not going to have anybody actually shift on anything. You need to have somebody emotionally convicted. How do you get somebody emotionally convicted? So my best way of doing this is having people connect to the sense of injustice. So what do you think the biggest sense of injustice there is when you're having this discussion with people, when you're talking about what's happening to animals, or just why people should go vegan? What do you think the biggest sense of injustice is? Anybody? Yes?
What have they done to deserve that?
So what's happening to the animals? Yeah?
Yeah, like what have they done to deserve that?
Right, their innocence?
Treat criminals like that.
Right, so the innocence of animals, yep. That's basically the biggest part of it, is it's the animals and what's happening to them. And there's so many injustices that are occurring to the animals. I mean, there's not just the fact that they're being slaughtered. We'd like to talk about animals being killed so much. But what about the fact that they're being mutilated, castrated, exploited, enslaved, kidnapped? They're being raped, they're being murdered, they're having their lives stolen from them. So they're not just being killed. There's so many layers to the injustice that you could cover with people on the streets. So you just figure out what you believe is the most effective, what really causes the most response emotionally from people. But I like to connect people to the sense of injustice where it pertains to the animals. I like to talk about the blood that we have on our hands as consumers. The injustice doesn't just span across with what's happening with animals. There's also injustices that are occurring to us as human beings. We're being lied to by these companies that are telling us that we need to eat meat for protein, and then we need to eat dairy products for calcium, omega-3 from fish, etc. And meanwhile, we watch our friends and family die around us from chronic diseases that are linked to our food and what we're eating, and we also suffer as a result of this. So this is also an injustice that has caused me, within my own limited subjective experience on this planet, to see my own family members, decay and die as a result of chronic disease. And if I had known this plant-based message earlier, we could have avoided all that pain and suffering. So there is an injustice within everybody's lives where it comes to disease. So talk to people about the food injustice that's at hand here as well. There's also a human rights injustice where it pertains to what's happening to the workers in slaughterhouses. Did you know that workers in slaughterhouses have higher rates of alcoholism and drug addiction than the military? Did you know that? When I found that out recently, it blew my mind, but it makes sense because there are far more slaughterhouses than there are bodies of army soldiers and stuff. So it makes sense. There's far more slaughterhouses in the world, and if you're stabbing animals to death every day, I couldn't even imagine doing that for 10 minutes. Some of these people work in these places for 10 months, 10 years. I mean, of course that's going to drive you crazy. I mean, a lot of these people can't even go to work unless they're high or drunk. There is a human rights injustice where it pertains to that as well, because as veterans don't get much aftercare when they're finished with their service. But what aftercare, if any, is there for slaughterhouses? There's literally zero. So the only way that we can address that problem is by going vegan. There's also an injustice where it pertains to crop farming. There are so many crop farmers that are being paid next to nothing to pick plants that are mostly fed to animals, because most of the world's crops are actually fed to animals that people eat. So there's also a human rights injustice where it comes to farming. My point is, there are many different levels of injustice where it comes to animal agriculture or animal exploitation. Focus on connecting people to that sense of injustice, and you'll succeed in the first stage, which is the emotional conviction. The second stage is to make sure that they understand that this is about them making a difference as an individual and not leaving it to the rest of the world to make a difference like we tend to do as humans. Now, human beings do this with even the most trivial of things, like a bit of litter on the ground, for example. We'll walk past it and think, what difference do I really make as an individual if I pick that up? There's plenty of other pieces of litter on the ground that aren't going to be picked up. Many other people aren't going to pick up litter. What difference do I make? What's the point? So we don't do anything about it. So it's very important that once you connect them to the sense of injustice, they see the problem and they see that the problem needs to be eradicated. Then you need to make it about them and why they need to make a difference, why they shouldn't just leave it to everybody else. So how do you do that? I like to empower people and remind people of the individual power that we have. So for example, now I'm not a statistician, but from my calculations, we spare the lives of 1,000 animals every year when you're vegan. And even that figure is conservative based on my calculations. I don't know how some other organizations have come up with figures as low as 100 per year. According to my calculations, it's 1,000 animals per year that you spare. And I won't say save, because you're not literally pulling animals out of farms when you eat a vegan cupcake. You're sparing the lives of these animals, bred into existence for the express purpose of being turned into your sandwich. So 1,000 animals per year, and I like to paint the picture for people. I say, imagine if 1,000 animals was running down the street right now. That would be considered a stampede. So that really, paints the picture like that's a lot of animals that I would be impacting just through my choice. I also like to highlight how easy it is for that individual to take action, because we've never been offered the opportunity to end an atrocity of this extent to which there is no other atrocity that can even compare. And we can so easily participate in doing it. Like 3 times a day we can just not eat a chicken burger and instead eat a veggie burger, and we can end this injustice. We can completely end this atrocity, which is the largest atrocity in the world. Nobody's been offered that opportunity ever. So talk to them about how easy it is to participate in taking action and making a difference. And also talk to them about why they need to take action. I like to use Albert Einstein's quote in saying that those who have a privilege to know have a duty to act. And I like to say we can't really expect those who don't know to act, can we? Because if we do that, then nothing will change. Like, most people are uninformed. So those who do know, we are the only ones, quite literally, that can act. So I like to remind people that we're the only people that can act. And that's why we need to act. So really drive that home, that second point, okay? And if you succeed in making them realize why they need to take action, then you've completed that stage. So the third stage is benefits. Let's face it, as human beings, we're all a little bit selfish. We like to know what's in it for us. So once you really connect somebody to the sense of injustice that's happening and why they need to take action, they also want to know what's in it for them. So what do you think the number one benefit is for going vegan? Anybody?
Better health.
Better health?
Animals.
Animals?
Better for animals.
Better for animals. Well, what's our personal benefit in that regard? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely health, I would say.
Health, yeah.
Or mental health.
Mental health?
Yeah.
Aligning with our morals.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So your conscience, cleaning up your conscience. So I would say that is actually the number one reason right there. I would say the number one benefit, rather, is to clear your conscience of this injustice and to clean your hands of the blood of innocent animals. The number two benefit would be your health. Because this is an altruistic movement, you're not supposed to do it expecting anything in return, but you do have many benefits when you go vegan. Number one obvious reason would be your health. But we know as vegans that the actual reason, the number one benefit is actually not having this, not being responsible anymore. We know that that's the number one benefit, right? But number 2 would be your health, the benefit of having better quality health and also adding years to your life. The environmental benefit, because we want a greener world, don't we, to live in, for us, for our kids' kids, our friends, our family. So the benefit of having a greener world, and the number 1 most impactful decision you can make to make a greener world is to be vegan. The other benefit would be for our fellow human beings to have a more peaceful and less exploitative world. It would be a vegan world. So that would be the other benefit for our fellow human beings. But benefits essentially are what will seal the deal. So if you leave the benefits at the end, you can also talk about the delicious vegan food that we eat and how awesome it is nowadays to have all the different vegan products that we have. You know, so people aren't missing out. It's the opposite. And that's also the benefit. You get to try amazing, delicious foods that are actually good for your health, or better for your health. So that's the 3 stages. I hope you all understand how that works. But essentially, if you take them through those 3 stages, you will essentially seal the deal. One last thing I'm going to share, which is something I've found helps a lot with outreach, that helped a lot while I was doing sales as well. And it's something called the feel, felt, found method. And this is how it works. Somebody says, I get what you're saying completely, but I just don't think that I could give up meat or like cheese. I just like it too much. Now I know that that's really no matter what it is, outreach related, just let me know. But if you'd like to just do it this way, specifically what I find most people are challenged with is non-vegan argumentation, specifically like what you would say to an argument, then we can kind of make it about that if you like, and you can just pitch me your most challenging non-vegan argumentation or situation you would deal with on the streets or otherwise, and I'll try to help you with it. So again, I'd just like to remind you, let's try and keep it to a question, and a question that's a new question, not pertaining to the previous question. So who would like to go first? Your hand went up first, so I'm kind of going to do it that way, if that's cool. Yes?
In my experience doing outreach, I fielded many questions of people just appealing to like personal anecdotes about they used to be vegan and they got really sick. Like, what can I say to them? Like, I don't know their personal experience. I don't know what they did. So how do I steer them like back to like maybe the ethical argument, which I know we like to focus on, but like people say all the time, oh, I went vegan and I got sick. Like, what do I say?
Yeah, I just today discovered a YouTuber who I actually used to like watching. He recently, yeah, the vegetable police guy. Yeah, he did a beef cleanse. I struggle even calling it that. And 30 days of nothing but beef. And I didn't even know how to process. I watched his video and just how would I respond? If he was in the room with me, like if I was in the same room as him and he was telling me this, I would just say, what exactly? Because in his video he was claiming he tried it all. He did all the nutrients, like he combined all the nutrients he was supposed to combine. He covered all the food groups, all the macrobiotics, all the micronutrients. I don't buy it. I feel like he is just overly paranoid and overthinking his diet. And I think there are a lot of people out there like that. They obsess over food so much. They think that the answers to all of their problems are going to come from food and what they're putting in their bodies. And because they don't reach that level of health that they think is going to come from that, or a level of enlightenment even, then they think that the diet is to blame for it and they blame everything on it. And now he's saying he's feeling satisfied by eating beef. Again, we all know that personal satisfaction and personal pleasure does not justify murdering animals. So Casey has not been a vegan. He's been somebody who was doing this for health from the beginning. And there are many signs of that, even though he called himself a vegan throughout. And this is one of the reasons why I like to watch his videos, is because he did seem to have some connection to the animal message, but he was also very apologetic in the sense that he would say that it's more about one's health than it is about the animals, and I disagree with that. If it came down to my personal health, I wouldn't go back to eating animal products, even if it came down to that. If I had to suffer, I would.
But just like, I understand that a lot of people are being completely dishonest when they say that. Like, I know they probably weren't vegan in the past, they're just saying that.
Yeah.
Just to kind of brush me off. But like, how do I?
Sorry, I didn't really answer to your question. I went on a bit of a rant. My bad. Because that was fresh. Like today, I just watched that video, so it's still on my mind. But to try and help you here, I would say, what exactly was it that you weren't getting from plants? What nutrient are you talking about? I would just try and keep a scientific conversation at hand, because most people are just, like you said, going off anecdotal experiences that have nothing to do with actual science. Like,
Could we just give them a definition for veganism and what an actual vegan is instead of like?
Or ask them why they went vegan in the first place and why they, like, what made that decision.
yeah, I'm with you on this one, by the way. So we could, ask them why they went vegan to begin with. Was it for health reasons? And then telling them about what veganism actually is, or what it actually is. Like I was explaining before, it's not just a diet. But for those who are coming at us from that angle saying, vegan diet let me down, and that's why I can't do this for the animals, because I'll just end up suffering, and what good would I be to the world if I'm just a suffering mess? I would just, again, what nutrient was it that you were missing? Because none of us really believe, as vegans, that there are people out there that just physically cannot be vegan. Like, I don't believe that for a second, and I have a nutrition background. Like, I came at this from a health point of view, to begin with. So, this is not, it's not up for debate. People can be vegan. It's just up to their own, discretion. So I would just, again, let me try and bring this back around to helping you. I would just say, what was it exactly that you were missing, that you felt you were missing? What exact nutrient was it? And then maybe discussing exactly how you can cover that on a plant-based diet. But I think it is important that we do bring it back to what veganism does actually stand for, that it's an ethical standpoint.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's all.
Alright, cool. Yes?
When I talk to people about our power as a consumer and the concept of supply and demand, sometimes people come with the argument that if the demand goes down, meat is only going to get cheaper and the poor will have more access to it, but it's not actually going to have any impact on animal agriculture.
Steve Best started saying this stuff back in the day as well. He's a speaker. It's just not how it works. Consumer demand is how it works. The only way we're going to change this is from the ground up, from consumerism. Our vote is our dollar. That's our vote. Our power is in our dollar and what we spend it on. And not creating the demand for these products is what will have these industries. And the government subsidies will be there, but they won't be there for long if the demand keeps dropping. Because they won't be able to justify the subsidies anymore, will they? The whole point of the subsidies is there's so many people demanding animal products. That's why they're there. If we take away the demand, the subsidies will go and the price will inflate, and we'll probably just, if we can end government subsidies alone, I think we could pretty much end animal ag. But that would be I don't know how we would go about doing that. I'm not in politics.
There's an organization here in Canada started, Nation Rising. Look into that. The 3 platforms of that.
Nation Rising?
Canada, Nation Rising.
Nation Rising. All right, shout out to Nation Rising. Next question, anybody? Yes?
What if someone is trying to deviate and they bring up sensitive issues like abortion? What's your stance on that? Or they try to get into your religious field? I don't want to go down that
Don't cuck. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Don't allow people to distract from this very important message. How dare people bring up other injustices or other topics of conversation into this as a means to detract from the importance from this cause. I would say simply, we don't believe that we need to have a stance on abortion as an animal rights organization. We're here operating for the animals. If you'd like to have a discussion about abortion, we can maybe do that later. But during this Cube of Truth, during this event, we're here to speak for the animals. Does that help?
Fair enough.
Cool. Yes?
You don't have to explain yourself on this. I'm just curious, where did your number of 1,000 animals per year come from? Can you explain your calculations?
Yeah, cool. So I was running through the sheer numbers of animals that are involved in just the choice to eat, like meat, for example. Like in one day, I would eat animal products for every meal, so 3 meals a day at least. I would eat some form of meat, some form of dairy usually, and some form of egg at least once a day, like scrambled or something like that. Now, if you consider the amount of animals that are involved in when you breed animals into existence and in the farming of animals, let's just consider the amount of animals that die on impact on birth. So at birth, there are so many victims here that are gone and don't even get counted. There are also so many babies that die or animals in general that die as a result of having no veterinary care. We also have countless animals that are killed and discarded before they even get to the slaughterhouse. So they'll be on the slaughterhouse truck, for example, they'll dehydrate and die. And those animals are discarded of. There are also countless animals that die just with marine animal agriculture. I mean, if you just think about that for a moment, for every 1 kilo of marine life that's bought and consumed, 5 kilos of marine life is discarded of. And we're talking about turtles and dolphins here. We're not talking about fish. We're talking about other sea animals that are revered more, I guess, So that piece of salmon that you buy in your sushi is not just contributing to the death of 1 salmon, it's the death of 6 animals potentially. There's also the animals that are brutalized in testing labs for our everyday products. And I didn't even realize, even now as a vegan activist, I'm still learning about all the ways that animals are tested on. I mean, it still blows my mind, all the different ways that humans have created ways to test on animals. Like, we've been testing on animals before we tested on humans, and we tested weaponry on animals before we tested them on humans in wars. And the first form of slavery and the first form of violence was carried out on animals before it was carried out on our fellow humans. So, without going astray here, essentially what I'm saying is, when you consider all the things that non-vegans do in their day-to-day lives that they contribute to and support, there are countless victims, and when I calculated it throughout 1 year, it was well over 1,000, that we don't support the breeding of and exploitation of. So that's why I say spare. Does that help to understand how I got the figure?
That's very helpful.
All right, cool. Next question. Yes, that hand went up first.
I had someone say to me that people, like activists showing footage from slaughterhouses, is propaganda trying to upset everybody. So that's like their argument.
So again, we have the 100-point system. There's only so much that we can do, so just focus on planting the seeds as best as you can. If somebody says that this is isolated footage, this is sensationalized, it's not really how it happens, invite them to join you at a vigil one day. Do you have a Save movement in Vancouver? You do, actually. I just confirmed that. Invite them to join you at a Save vigil one time and go to these slaughterhouses and visit them and see for themselves. Ensure them that the footage is local and standard practice. It does highlight exactly the standard practices of even your grass-fed, organic, and free-range farms. And if they still don't believe you, there's only so much you can do. So.
I have a follow-up to that. I just said that, well, actually, when you think about it, promoting the consumption of meat and dairy and things like that is actually unhealthy for you. So the people that are promoting that lifestyle are actually using propaganda against you. I don't know if that was the best thing to say, but.
No, I think that's a good angle too. At the end, I'd probably drop in, who's really being confused here. We've been told that we need to eat meat for protein, and yet meat causes cancer, according to the World Health Organization. So there's something not right there. Anybody else? Yes?
There's 2 things. What do you say to someone who says, I just don't care? Elephant doesn't care about the environment or his own health?
Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, we have the #1 excuse that stumps every vegan activist on the planet. I don't care. Guess what? There is actually an answer to that, and it's, when did you stop caring? I like that response. Because that reminds people, there was a time, right, when we were kids, we wouldn't have accepted any of this. We would have completely rejected it. So, when did you stop caring is a good way to bring people back to their senses? Does that help?
Yeah, that's a nice one, I like it.
Okay. Yes.
How do you deal with someone who is against, like, is agree about the picture that he's showing, like the cube show to him, like he's like, I don't like that, but he's still not vegan because he's protecting like hunter, he's a hunter.
I didn't understand the first part of what you said. No, your accent's fine. Can you just go with
No,
the
I
first
said,
part
like,
of what you said?
I
So I get he's a hunter.
Yeah, no, he's a hunter,
Yeah.
and he said like, but he's against like the screening, like the fact that the factor.
Against the way we farm, yeah.
But he's still not vegan because he's.
He's a farmer. Well, I would then bring it back to necessity and ask the question, do you need to kill animals to be healthy and happy? Because if we don't have an actual necessity for doing this, then why would we continue it? Just ask the question. That's all you can do. If we can live a life healthy and happy without harming animals whatsoever, then why wouldn't we? Essentially, if we cannot shoot animals, why wouldn't we choose to do that? And if there is that option available, doesn't that morally oblige us to do so? To put the knives and guns away? So that's what I would ask. Does that help? Cool. Anybody else? Yes.
How do you deal with people, it could be friends or at cubes, that tells you, I'm really for a cause, I understand what you're saying, everything makes sense, and they still consume our animal? I mean, they know everything, but they just don't do the move of changing.
So, because that's a question regarding friends and family.
Or it can be at the cube also.
So they get everything and then they're just not sold on it yet? Well, we can only do as much as we can by, again, trying to get them up on the 100-point system. You do your best in making sure that they understand why, because I would see that as a lack of conviction.
Mm-hmm.
So why is what I would focus on, making sure they understand why they need to be vegan, and understanding once they figure that out, the how part is there and ready for them. You know, the support is there.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. And family is just a longer version of what I just said. It just takes a lot longer. Yes.
Right, so I haven't used your argument about slaughterhouse workers yet, and I want to start, but I imagine that the answer to that is, well, so you want to close the slaughterhouses and put them out of a job, or you want to reduce the demand on the crops and put them out of a job?
We want to put them in blueberry farms. Because nobody's screaming and dying in blueberry farms.
But you just said there's going to be less plant agriculture as well if we.
Well, they could drive cars and do Uber or something. Like, there's so much more. Like, do you think anybody would want to work in a slaughterhouse?
Well, no, but why do they work there? Like, if they could have
Out of pure desperation for a paycheck, and those jobs pay crap money. So I would say that if you're going to work in a slaughterhouse, you'd be happy to work in anything.
But most slaughterhouse workers are immigrants and
Yes,
they
yeah.
don't have.
Like they can't. They
Yes.
already
It's
can't
kind
work
of
anymore.
privileged to say, oh, they can go work in this or this or this. Like, you can't.
Okay, that's a good point. I'm not trying to be privileged here, but what I'm saying is we can create other work for those individuals. I'm not saying they should be happy to just be out of a job and whatever they can get, they can get. I'm just saying if they've gone to that level of working in a slaughterhouse, that would seem to me very desperate in getting a job, and they would take any job. But if we create a job for them, that would be the answer. And with a vegan world, we would have jobs created for them. There'd be so many. The farms won't go away. The product line will change. We'll have less farms involved, but more vegan products involved. So there'll be more vegan companies making vegan food and factories for these individuals to work in, etc. So the whole market would change, and there would be vegan businesses left, right, and center.
And I think that's a gradual
Yeah.
situation. That's not like tomorrow.
No.
So you have to talk to people though.
Sure, yeah.
It's not
It would be a
tomorrow.
gradual process of supply and demand until we get to that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
What do you tell somebody who says, I only eat a little bit of meat?
I only eat a little bit of meat.
Yeah.
Have you seen that meme where the animal said, thanks, I'm only a little bit dead? Well, that's kind of what I would say to them, actually. I would say, well, I'd probably make that joke and say the animals are probably saying they're only a little bit dead. You know, because even if we eat a little bit of animal products, we are killing animals along the way. So I would just go back to the why factor, because that sounds like that person doesn't have the conviction. So I would go back to the why factor, what this really comes down to, and leave it at that. Does that help? All right. Yes?
You're saying if we saw a child watching, we should kind of take them away if they're by themselves and
Yeah.
pick the parents, and then educate them in veganism in a child-friendly way?
Yeah.
Could you sort of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, like I wouldn't use long words like exploitation. They won't know what that means. I would say, do you eat meat? And then, yes. Do you know that when you eat meat, you hurt animals? Oh no, how? It's usually like that, honestly. So I would just like try to keep it to smaller words, bite-sized, digestible words. Yeah. Do you love animals? Yes. Do you like dogs? Yes. Yeah, and then just like try to, have you heard about being vegan? Just plant the word vegan in there so they know what to shoot for. They know what the goal is. Also, I would empower them and give them as much support. I would say, because sometimes, like I've had situations, and I don't necessarily encourage this for every situation, but where the parents are basically trying to pull the child away. So I had this one situation. I don't know if this is even valid to bring this up, but fuck it, I'm going to bring it up. So there was one situation where there was a parent who had a child who wanted to be a vet. She wanted to be a veterinary nurse. She loved animals. She was a little kid, she saw what we're doing, she was shocked, she wanted to go vegan, but her mother was like, don't even listen to the vegan stuff, it's not healthy and all this stuff. And while she was saying, she was like trying to pull the kid away, and the kid was still wanting to talk to me. So eventually the mother gives up, walks away, the kid stays. I have about 30 seconds before the kid gets yelled at, okay? In that 30 seconds, I tell the kid, don't listen to your mother when she tells you you can't be vegan. You can do this, and you can be healthy, and you can be kind to animals in the process. Here's a card, and here's how you can get more information to learn more. I told them to research as much as possible, so that you know your stuff, and not to just listen to your mother and father because they don't know everything. Yeah, like soon we might have like a child-friendly version of some information that we can give to a child, but right now we have our cards, and yeah, I feel like if they went to the website at a reasonable age, they'll find some good information on there. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
I think you mentioned in the outreach it's important for us to keep promoting a pure vegan message, just kind of go vegan. I was curious, what do you think are the downsides of just promoting, asking people to perhaps just reducing meat consumption? Mainly because there's a chain of thought where it's a lot easier to get someone to reduce their meat consumption, maybe getting 80% of the people to reduce their meat consumption versus the amount of effort it takes to even conserve 1 or 2% of the people becoming vegan, right?
I understand your train of thought. Believe I've been down this train of thought many times, okay? Now here's the thing. I believe strongly through my own research and experience that the vegan movement has taken so long to actually come to fruition because of this one simple fact. We have not been promoting it as veganism. We've been promoting it as a diet, as something that people can do gradually, etc. Now, the reason why it's going slower because of that is because we would never do that with any other injustice. We would never say racism is wrong, but on Sundays, fine. Just do it in a park somewhere where we don't have to look. But it's okay, just maybe cut down gradually and then you'll become a non-racist one day. Do you know what I mean? We would never say child abuse is unacceptable, but if you're addicted to it, I know what it's like. Maybe just only keep the kicking in the children in the face. Maybe keep that to Sundays or just one day a week, we would never say that. So my point is, we should just be promoting what is morally correct, and that is that no form of animal exploitation is morally justified, and we should be showing people how easy it is to go vegan, and if people want to do less, they can do less, but we're not going to compromise on something that is so simple and is so urgent. We're facing fishless oceans in 30 years. the fact that anybody would be promoting anything less than veganism at this point is insane to me. Because we won't even have a world to discuss any other issue on if we do not get this straight, if we don't prioritize this. So all the human rights issues, all of the, I mean, somebody recently showed me a Vice video of 17 people every year in New Zealand die from smoking synthetic cannabis. I mean, do they have a cause for them as well? Because there are causes for so many things on this planet, and they're all important, but we do have to prioritize right now because we're racing extinction. And that's a scary thing because we've never been in this position before as a species. And not even vegans actually fully connect with this. Like, I know what it's like to just forget about this reality because it doesn't seem like it's even real. But it is real. If scientists are saying it, like, who are we to think it's not real? For environmentalists that are not even vegan saying this, like, why should we think it's not real? They have no agenda in saying such things. So my point is, anything less than a vegan message at this point is incredibly, it's a disservice to the planet and to the animals and to everyone involved here. I just see it as one of the biggest injustices ever. I get when people say to you, oh, yeah, I get it. So I started, like, I've dropped meat now. Isn't that good? Like, I'm on my way, right? I wouldn't say, no, you're not vegan yet, so get the fuck out of my face. I would say, that's great, just remember the goal, which is to go vegan. You know, just bring it back to the importance of being vegan. Because if you play too much into the idea that it's okay to do less, we're doing a disservice, I feel. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. I completely agree. I think the core message should be go vegan, but we should be pragmatic as well in terms of how people adopt it slowly. Mainly because
to their perspective and what they're going through. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. All right, anybody else? Yes.
So where I originally come from, which is India, cows are considered to be holy. But from a third world country, there are so many problems, right? Like someone has beef and there are mob lynchings happening because of that, because that person just happened to have beef. So now it's like, you try to justify the cow's life is important, but then people get mad at you. Like, you value the life of a cow over a human being that was just killed for having beef.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? Just one more time.
So like, cows are considered to be holy in India, right?
Yes.
And beef consumption is banned in India. But yet, India is one of the largest exporters of beef.
It's banned in all of India?
Yeah, it is.
I didn't know that. Did anybody here know that?
Yes.
Beef is banned in India. For eating?
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, continue.
So anyway, so it's a very conservative stance on that. And if occasionally some homeless guy or someone were to consume beef illegally and the mob finds out, they'll resort to tactics like taking the law into their own hands, like mob lynching the person, killing him alive, killing him in the public eye. And this will be in the news, right? And you try to bring it up to your friends, like, hey, you should not harm the animals. But they get defensive about this because they think you're valuing the life of a human or the life of an animal.
Yeah, so you're asking what I would respond to if somebody says, why do you value the life of humans, of animals above humans?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not picking sides, but they are, and they're like...
They're right?
They're thinking I'm picking sides.
Oh, they think you're picking sides, okay. So I would just simply say vegans, we're not advocating for animals to have the same rights as us in terms of driving cars and voting. We just want them to not be stabbed in the throat. That's it, that's all we're advocating for. So we just want them to not be harmed unnecessarily, and that's what's happening at the moment. We're just trying to put an end to that. So does that help?
So, I mean, focus on basics, I guess.
Well, again, we're not saying that animal life is more important than human life, and we're not saying that human life is more important than animal life either. We're just saying that humans don't have the right to stab animals in the throat needlessly. Can we just stop doing that, please? That's all we're saying, and that doesn't... If anything, it's the other way around. People are placing human life as more value, placing more value on human life than animal life by trying to justify eating animals and wearing animals and using animals. We're just saying, can we just not have the superiority complex, and can we just try and have a bit more respect? Not necessarily treat them as equals, just not harm them needlessly. Let's just start there. Does that help? Okay, cool. Anybody else? Yes.
If you find that someone kind of connects more with one of the other arguments, like environment or health, do you still try to like make them make the connection with animals, or do you kind of try to focus on that and see if that like works for them more?
Definitely play into a person's strong point, like whatever is their buying signal, then hammer into that, but don't just hammer into that. Because if you just focus on what their sensitivity is, then you won't do the entire package justice. As you know, veganism is a tick for many boxes. It's a win, 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 win. Win, actually. It's like 4 or 5 wins at least. So I would say that focus on the environmental, but then bring it back to the animals by saying, yeah, man, like, you know, we're saving all this land space and all this water, and we're taking better care of our oceans and our rainforests when we move to a vegan diet. And also, there are 3 trillion animals that are being bred into existence and then slaughtered against their will. I mean, all of this is unnecessary. All this bloodshed on our hands, we end up destroying. I would actually bring it back to the animals by saying that it starts with the animals, in saying that like, this is what happens when we think, you know, with greed, and we start to kill animals in such numbers. We end up destroying our own environment as a result. So if they're more sensitive to the environment, I would definitely play into that with environmental facts, and, you know, ensuring them that this is definitely the best way to go environmentally. But then going back to like the root cause of all of this, which is the root cause of all of this is the mindset that it's okay for us to exploit animals. That view itself is where all of this came from. So the root of the problem, bring it back to that, I would say, and sort of like touch on the animals. You know, the health, we also suffer as a result of, you know, karmic debt. You can maybe bring it up in that kind of way. So does that help?
Yeah.
Alright, cool. Yes?
What do you say to people who dismiss the documentary What the Health? I hear that a lot.
They dismiss it?
They say there weren't very many true studies backing it up. And I haven't looked into the evidence myself. But
It's all factual.
I would think so. It's all vegan doc.
Kip and Keegan got so heavily scrutinized for cowspiracy, and because they got Leonardo DiCaprio to executive produce on cowspiracy, they knew that they couldn't just put out some documentary that was, you know, that included fudged information. They had to be scientifically accurate and factual. So on their website, cowspiracy.com/facts, and also What the Health. I don't know what the actual. Does anybody know what the website is for What the Health? Is it whatthehealth.com? Whatthehealththefilm.com/facts, I think it might be. If you just go to that website, there's a facts page where they have links to all the sources for the information they share in the documentary. If somebody doesn't buy into What the Health, I don't know, maybe you can share them the 10,000 other scientific sources that they could. So you can talk to them about the China study, you could talk to them about forks over knives, you could talk to them about Proteinaholic, How Not to Die, you can talk...
I just want to add to what I'm saying. So I work in the medical field, and it's doctors that are saying this to me. So the answer I get when I recommend others is, yeah, you can find just as many studies that promote the benefits of meat that I'm not going to bother with.
So they're not being intellectually honest with you then, at that point? Well, if they're not being intellectually honest with you, then yeah, just move on. You can give people the source to find out the knowledge and then convince them on why they should go and get that information, but if they don't do it, then that's not on you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Cool. Anybody else? Alright. Alright, yeah, cool. So the 4 things that I packaged for you all is why is far more important than how. The 100-point system, which is taking away the focus of convincing people to go vegan on the spot. The feel, felt, found method. And the 3 stages for the sales process, I guess you could call it. Which is, first step, emotional conviction. Second step, why they need to make a difference as an individual. And third step, the benefits and what's in it for them. If there are no other questions, I'll wrap this up. Does anybody have any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for being a part of this workshop. Yes.
Sorry, what was, just like last three again.
Ah, so the three parts to okay, so the first part was emotional conviction. The second part is why they need to take action as an individual. And the third step is benefits. What's in it for them? All right, thank you all so much for having me.
Or do you just?
Training video?
Yeah, like I was just looking on your website, just for people that want to be a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, we've got.
Q&A or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So we run like like we're thinking of doing online workshops, but at this point we're actually in the process of building an online academy.